My name is Emma, and I am 32 years old. 3 years ago, my mother-in-law called me 2 hours before my own wedding anniversary dinner and said 8 words that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. You were never good enough for my son. Just like that. No warning. No build-up. 8 words delivered in that smooth, controlled voice she always used, the one that sounded like silk on the surface but had razors underneath. The one I had spent 3 years trying to earn the warmth from. I was standing in our bathroom when she called. I remember exactly what I was doing. I was curling my hair. The iron was hot in my hand, steam rising in thin white ribbons toward the ceiling. I had spent 40 minutes getting ready, the blue dress Daniel loved, the perfume he had bought me in Paris on our honeymoon, the small diamond earrings his grandmother had gifted me the day we got engaged. I had been excited. That's the part that hurts most when I look back. I had been genuinely, completely excited. 3 years of marriage. A dinner reservation at the restaurant where Daniel had proposed. Roses already sitting in a vase on our dining table, 12 red ones he had left that morning with a note that said, 3 years down, forever to go. I was happy. And then my phone buzzed. Linda. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something small and instinctive in my chest hesitated, that quiet animal awareness that had been trying to warn me about Linda from the very beginning. But I answered. Because I always answered. Because 3 years of trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law had trained me to always answer. Hi Linda. Emma. Her voice. Clipped. Precise. Like a scalpel. I need to speak with you before tonight. Of course, I said, setting the curling iron down carefully. Is everything okay? A pause. The kind she used deliberately, the silence that was supposed to make you feel small, off balance, already apologizing for something you hadn't done yet. Daniel deserves better, she said. He always has. I've watched you for 3 years, Emma. I've watched you try. And trying isn't enough when you simply aren't the right fit for someone like my son. The curling iron ticked against the marble counter as it cooled. I stood completely still. I don't understand, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. You're not from our world. Each word measured, deliberate, a door being closed quietly in my face. Your background, your family, your career, none of it matches what Daniel was raised to expect. I allowed this marriage because my son was in love. But love fades, Emma. And when it does, what will you have to offer him? The bathroom mirror showed me my own reflection, half-curled hair, blue dress, diamond earrings. A woman who had spent 40 minutes preparing for a celebration. You were never good enough for my son, Linda continued. I think somewhere, deep down, you've always known that. She hung up. I stood in my bathroom for a long time. The roses were still in the vase in the dining room. Daniel's note was still on the counter. The reservation was still in 2 hours. And I was still standing there, holding my phone, feeling the familiar sensation that Linda had perfected over 3 years, that slow, creeping doubt that started in your chest and worked its way outward until it touched everything, colored everything, made you question every good thing you had built. I had felt it before. Many times. The first time was 6 days after our wedding. Linda had invited us for Sunday lunch, just family, she had said, casual, relaxed. I had baked a lemon cake, spent 2 hours on it, carried it carefully in both hands up her front steps. She had looked at it the way people look at something they find slightly embarrassing. We don't really do store-bought flavors here, she had said, setting it aside. Daniel prefers chocolate. You'll learn. It wasn't store-bought. I had made it from scratch. And Daniel's favorite had always been lemon. I had made it for his birthday the month before and he had eaten 3 slices. But I had smiled. I had said of course. I had filed it away as a misunderstanding. The second time was at Christmas. She had organized a family photo, her husband Robert, Daniel, his sister Catherine. She had arranged everyone carefully, directed positions, fussed over angles. When I stepped into the frame naturally, she had looked at the photographer and said, "Just family for this one." Just family. I was his wife. I had stepped back. I had smiled. I had told myself she was nervous about the photo, that she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that I was being too sensitive. That was what Linda did. She made you question your own perception. She delivered cruelty so calmly, so smoothly, that afterward you wondered if you had imagined the blade. She never shouted. She never made scenes. She was always composed, always reasonable, always the picture of gracious dignity. And somehow that made it worse. Because when you tried to explain it to someone, when you tried to find the words for what she did, it always sounded small. She said the cake was store-bought. She didn't include me in the photo. It sounded like nothing. It sounded like oversensitivity. But 3 years of nothing adds up to something. 3 years of small exclusions and quiet dismissals and carefully worded observations about my background, my family, my career. 3 years of being made to feel like a guest in my own marriage. 3 years of watching Linda look at Daniel like he was something precious she was patiently waiting to reclaim. And now, 8 words. Delivered 2 hours before our anniversary dinner, into the phone, in that silk and razor's voice. You were never good enough for my son. I set my phone face down on the bathroom counter. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I picked up the curling iron, finished my hair, touched up my lipstick, and straightened the small diamond earrings Daniel's grandmother had given me with both hands and a warm smile on the day we got engaged. I was going to that dinner. But something had shifted inside me. Something quiet and permanent, like a door that had been standing open for 3 years finally, gently, clicking shut. I was done absorbing. I was done smiling. Tonight, everything was going to change. I didn't tell Daniel about the phone call that night. I know how that sounds. 3 years of marriage, a man who left roses on the dining table with notes about forever, and I sat across from him at a candlelit table in the restaurant where he had proposed and said nothing. But here is what you need to understand about living inside Linda's particular brand of cruelty. It makes you doubt yourself first. By the time we were seated at our table, white tablecloth, low lighting, the soft sound of a piano somewhere behind us, I had already replayed the phone call 17 times in my head. And each time I replayed it, Linda's voice got smoother and my reaction got larger. That was her gift. She could make you feel like the unreasonable one without ever raising her voice. Maybe she was just being honest. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe I am too sensitive. I had learned these thoughts the way you learn a language, slowly at first, then fluently, until they ran automatically without any effort at all. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. You look beautiful, he said. The way he said it, simple, certain, without any agenda, made my chest ache. Thank you, I said. I smiled. I lifted my wine glass. I let the evening be what it was supposed to be, beautiful, warm, ours. And I said nothing about his mother. Because that was the other thing Linda had perfected over 3 years. The wedge. The careful, deliberate placement of herself between Daniel and me in ways that were never quite visible, never quite provable. If I told Daniel what she had said, one of 2 things would happen. Either he would believe me, and then I would spend the rest of the night watching him carry that weight, watching the celebration drain out of his eyes, or he would hesitate. Not because he didn't love me, but because Linda was his mother, and she was very, very good at being someone's mother. She saved her best performances for Daniel. Around him she was warm. Attentive. The kind of mother who remembered every preference, every story, every small detail of his life. She called him every Sunday morning without fail. She kept photographs of him throughout her house, Daniel at 7 on a bicycle, Daniel at 16 in a suit at some formal event, Daniel at his college graduation, beaming. She talked about his achievements with a pride that was genuine and fierce. She loved her son. I never doubted that. What I doubted was whether her love for him left any room for mine. I lay awake that night after dinner, Daniel asleep beside me, his arm across my waist, and I let myself finally do what I had been avoiding for 3 years. I went back to the beginning. I thought about the first time I met Linda. Daniel had warned me, gently, in the careful way he had. She's protective, he had said. She takes time to warm up. Don't take it personally if she seems reserved at first. I had nodded. I had understood. I had walked into that first dinner armed with warmth and effort and the lemon cake I had baked from scratch. She had shaken my hand. Not hugged me. Shaken my hand. Firm, brief, assessing. The way you greet someone at a job interview. I had told myself it was just her way. I thought about 6 months in, when Daniel and I had announced our engagement. His father Robert had hugged me immediately, warm, genuine, a little teary. His sister Catherine had screamed and grabbed my hand to look at the ring. The room had filled with noise and celebration and champagne. Linda had smiled. Thin and controlled. She had kissed Daniel's cheek and said, "My darling boy." Then she had turned to me and said, "I hope you understand what you're taking on." I had laughed. I had assumed it was a joke. It was not a joke. I thought about the wedding planning. 8 months of it. 8 months of Linda inserting herself into every decision with the precision of someone who had been planning this wedding long before I existed. The venue she preferred. The flowers she found more appropriate. The guest list that kept expanding with her friends, her colleagues, her distant relatives I had never met. My mother, quiet, gentle, a retired schoolteacher from a small town, had sat in those planning meetings with her hands folded in her lap and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had made one suggestion, gently, about the centerpieces. Linda had looked at her the way you look at a child who has said something sweet but incorrect. "We have a vision," Linda had said. "I'm sure you understand." My mother had nodded. She had not spoken again for the rest of the meeting. I had squeezed her hand under the table. She had squeezed back. 2 people communicating everything in silence because the room didn't belong to us. I thought about the wedding day itself. The moment that nobody saw except me. We were in the bridal suite, 20 minutes before the ceremony. My bridesmaids had stepped out. I was alone for a moment, standing in my dress, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. And then the door opened and Linda walked in. She stood behind me. Our reflections faced each other in the mirror. She looked at me for a long moment, at the dress, the veil, the flowers in my hair. Her expression was unreadable. Then she said, very quietly, "He chose you. I'll never fully understand it. But he chose you." And she left. 20 minutes before my wedding. She had walked in, said those words, and walked out. And I had stood there in my dress in front of the mirror and told myself it was just nerves, just emotion, just a mother struggling to let go. I had walked down the aisle smiling. I had said my vows with my whole heart. And I had filed that moment away in the place where I kept all the other moments, the cake, the photograph, the planning meetings, the handshake instead of a hug, and I had buried it under 3 years of trying harder. Now, lying in the dark with Daniel's arm across my waist, I finally stopped burying. I looked at all of it clearly. Every moment. Every carefully delivered blade. Every silk and razor's comment that had left me doubting my own perception. And I understood something I should have understood much sooner. This was never going to stop on its own. Linda was not going to wake up one day and decide I was enough. She was not going to have a change of heart, a softening, a moment of grace. She had spent 3 years telling me, in every way available to her, that I did not belong in her son's life. The only question was what I was going to do about it. I turned my head and looked at Daniel sleeping beside me. His face relaxed, open, completely at peace. This man who left roses and notes about forever. This man who had chosen me, clearly and completely, on a day his mother had tried to shadow. He deserved to know. Not to hurt him. Not to force a choice. But because 3 years of silence had only made Linda bolder, and I was done being the one who absorbed her poison quietly so that everyone else could stay comfortable. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I was going to tell Daniel everything. And whatever happened next, at least it would be real. At least we would finally be standing in the truth together, instead of me standing in it alone. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something that wasn't doubt. It felt dangerously close to courage. Morning came slowly. The kind of morning that feels different before you even open your eyes, heavy with something unfinished, something waiting. I lay still for a few minutes, listening to Daniel's breathing beside me, watching the pale winter light push through the curtains and stretch itself across the bedroom floor. I had made a decision last night. In the daylight it felt both more real and more terrifying. Daniel woke up the way he always did, gradually, peacefully, surfacing from sleep without any of the sharp edges that mornings sometimes carry. He turned toward me and smiled before he was fully awake. That smile. The one that had made me fall in love with him in the first place, unguarded, warm, completely without performance. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I said. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from my face. Such a small thing. The kind of small thing that accumulates over years into something enormous, into the actual fabric of a life. I took a breath. "Daniel," I said. "I need to tell you something." Something shifted in his eyes. Not alarm exactly, more like attention. The particular focus of someone who loves you and can tell the difference between something happened and something is wrong. "Okay," he said. Quietly. Giving me the space. I told him everything. Not just the phone call, though I started there, with those 8 words, watching his face as they landed. I told him about the wedding day mirror moment. About the photograph at Christmas. About the lemon cake. About my mother sitting with her hands folded in her lap while Linda looked through her like she wasn't there. About 3 years of small exclusions and quiet dismissals and Silk and Razor's observations delivered in that smooth controlled voice. I told him all of it. I had imagined this conversation many times over 3 years. In my versions it usually went one of 2 ways, either Daniel immediately defended his mother, and we fought, and the gulf between us widened, or he immediately believed me and everything was instantly resolved and Linda somehow transformed overnight into someone reasonable. Neither of those things happened. What happened instead was quieter and more complicated and more real than either version I had imagined. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He didn't minimize. He lay there beside me in the pale morning light and he listened to 3 years of things I had been carrying alone, and his face moved through several expressions I had never seen on him before, surprise, then pain, then something that looked like recognition, then a grief that was deeper than either of those. When I finished, the room was very quiet. "Emma," he said finally. His voice was different. Lower, rougher, like something had scraped it on the way out. "I'm sorry." Not "I didn't know." Not "Are you sure that's what she meant?" Not "My mother isn't like that." Just, "I'm sorry." 2 words that landed with the weight of everything they contained. "Did you know?" I asked. I needed to ask it. Any of it? He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, the kind where someone is actually examining themselves rather than preparing a defense. Not the specifics, he said. But I knew, I think I always knew, that something wasn't right. The way she talked about you when you weren't there. Small things. Comments I told myself were just her personality. He stopped. I told myself you were fine. Because you always seemed fine. I wasn't fine, I said. I know, he said. I'm sorry I didn't look harder. We lay there for a long time without speaking. Outside, the city was waking up, distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere below, the ordinary sounds of a world continuing without any awareness of the conversation happening in this bedroom. Of the 3 years of silence finally breaking open. What do you want to do? Daniel asked. And there it was. The question I had been both dreading and waiting for. Because here is the thing about finally speaking the truth after years of silence. The truth doesn't just sit there neatly. It opens doors. It demands decisions. It requires everyone in the room to stop pretending and start choosing. I need her to know, I said. I need her to hear, from both of us, together, that what she's been doing is not acceptable. That it stops. That I am your wife and I am not going anywhere and she needs to treat me accordingly. Daniel nodded slowly. And if she doesn't, he asked. I looked at him directly. Then we create distance. Real distance. Not the polite kind where I keep smiling and absorbing. Actual boundaries with actual consequences. Another silence. I watched him carefully. This was the moment, I knew. This was the crossroads that Linda had been steering us toward for 3 years, the moment where Daniel would have to choose between the version of loyalty his mother demanded and the version his marriage required. He sat up. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked at the window, at the pale light, at the world outside. Then he turned back to me with something settled in his expression, something decided. You're my wife, he said. Simply. Completely. You come first. You should have always come first. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that out loud. Something cracked open in my chest. Not broke, cracked open. The way frozen ground cracks open in spring, making room for something to grow. I had not realized until that moment how much I had needed to hear those words. How 3 years of absorbing Linda's poison had eroded something in me, not my love for Daniel, never that, but my certainty that his love for me was solid enough to stand on when things got hard. It was solid enough. It had always been solid enough. I just hadn't let myself fully believe it. We called Linda that same afternoon. Daniel made the call. I sat beside him at the kitchen table, his free hand holding mine, our fingers interlocked. He had the phone on speaker so I could hear and Linda could know I was there. She answered on the second ring. Daniel, darling. Mom. His voice was calm. Steady. The voice of a man who had made a decision and was standing in it. I need to talk to you about some things Emma has shared with me. I need you to listen. A pause. When Linda spoke again her voice had shifted, still smooth, still controlled, but with something underneath it now. A careful recalibration. Of course, she said. Though I have to say, Daniel, I hope Emma hasn't been. Mom. Firmer this time. Please listen. He told her. He went through it methodically, the phone call from the night before, the wedding day, the photograph, the cake, my mother in the planning meetings. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He laid out the facts the way you lay out evidence, clearly, calmly, without room for reinterpretation. Linda was silent through most of it. When he finished she said, and I will never forget this, I was only trying to protect you. Daniel looked at me. I held his gaze. From what, Mom? He said quietly. From the woman I chose. From my own marriage. From being happy. Silence. Emma is my wife, Daniel said. She is my family. And the way you have treated her, it ends now. Not because I'm angry. Because I love you both and I will not watch this continue. Linda said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, in a voice I had never heard from her before, smaller somehow, stripped of its usual silk, I see. She hung up. Daniel set the phone down on the table. We sat in the quiet kitchen, his hands still holding mine, the afternoon light moving slowly across the floor between us. She'll need time, he said. I know, I said. But that doesn't change anything, he said. What I said stands. I looked at this man who had finally, completely, chosen me, and felt something settle inside me that had been unsettled for 3 years. It wasn't over. I knew that. Linda was not the kind of woman who accepted correction quietly. There would be more to come, reactions, retreats, new strategies. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't facing it alone. And that changed everything. Linda went silent for 3 weeks. Not the warm kind of silence. Not the silence of someone reflecting, reconsidering, doing the quiet internal work that genuine change requires. This was a different kind of silence entirely, the calculated kind. The kind that has intention behind it, that is itself a message. You will feel my absence. And we did. Or rather, Daniel did. That was Linda's strategy, I realized. She couldn't punish me directly anymore. Daniel had drawn a line and she understood, at least for now, that crossing it openly would cost her something she wasn't willing to lose. So she went around it. She withdrew from Daniel instead, missed his Sunday calls, responded to his texts with single words, declined a dinner invitation with a vague excuse about not feeling well. She was making him pay for choosing me. I watched it happen with a helpless ache. Daniel carried it quietly, the way he carried most things, without complaint, without drama, just a subtle heaviness that settled around his eyes in the evenings. He didn't say much about it. But I knew him well enough to see it. The way he checked his phone after Sunday morning passed without her call. The way he looked at it and set it down and said nothing. You can call her, I told him one evening. He looked at me. You shouldn't have to tell me that. I know. But I'm telling you anyway. He shook his head slowly. She's doing this on purpose, Emma. And if I call her now, I'm telling her it worked. He was right. And I loved him for seeing it clearly. But love doesn't make watching someone hurt any easier. The silence broke on a Thursday evening 3 weeks later. Not with a phone call. With a visit. I came home from work to find Linda's car parked outside our building. My stomach tightened immediately, that old familiar response, 3 years of conditioning firing before my mind had even fully processed what I was seeing. My hand tightened on my bag strap. My shoulders pulled back. Steady, I told myself. You are not who you were 3 weeks ago. I went upstairs. She was sitting in our living room. Daniel was across from her, his posture careful, his face composed in the particular way of someone managing several things at once. He looked at me when I walked in, a quick, reassuring glance that said I'm here, I've got you, stay steady. Linda turned when I entered. She looked different. Not diminished exactly. Linda was not a woman who diminished easily. But something about her was less armored than usual. Her hands were in her lap rather than gesturing with their usual controlled authority. Her silken razor's voice, when she spoke, had less silk in it and none of the razors. Emma, she said. Linda, I said. I sat down beside Daniel. The three of us existed in silence for a moment, the particular charged silence of people who have things to say and are negotiating the order. Linda spoke first. "I've been thinking," she said. Carefully. Each word placed deliberately, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "About what Daniel said. About my behavior." I waited. "I want to explain something," she said. "Not to excuse it, but to explain." I nodded once. "Go ahead." She looked at her hands for a moment. Then at Daniel. Then, finally, at me, and it was the most directly she had ever looked at me in 3 years. Not through me, not past me, not at the space slightly to my left. At me. "Daniel is my only son," she said. "When he told me about you, before I even met you, I had already decided you were wrong for him. Not because of anything you had done. Because no one was ever going to be right for him in my eyes." She paused. "That was my failing. Not yours." The room was very quiet. "I treated you unfairly from the beginning," she continued. "The things Daniel described, the photograph, the cake, the wedding day." Something moved across her face. "The wedding day especially. I have thought about that every day since our phone call." I said nothing. I was not ready to speak yet. "I am not good at being wrong," Linda said. Which was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever said in my presence. "I am not good at admitting it. I come from a family where," she stopped. Started again. "It doesn't matter where I come from. What matters is what I did. And what I did was unkind. Consistently, deliberately unkind. To someone my son loves." She looked at Daniel. "I could see how much he loved you," she said softly. "From the very beginning I could see it. And I think that frightened me more than anything else. Because it was real. And real love meant I was losing him in a way I wasn't prepared for." Daniel made a small sound beside me. Not quite words. Just acknowledgement, the sound of someone hearing something they had needed to hear for a long time. "I am not asking for immediate forgiveness," Linda said. She turned back to me. "I understand that trust is rebuilt slowly. If it can be rebuilt at all." Her voice was steady but her hands in her lap were not quite still. "I am asking for the chance to try." The room waited. This was the moment. I understood that. This was the pivot point of the whole story, the place where everything that came before and everything that came after balanced on a single choice. I could feel Daniel beside me, not pressuring, not leaning, just present. Whatever I said, he would stand beside me. He had made that clear. I looked at Linda. At this woman who had spent 3 years making me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. Who had called me 2 hours before my anniversary dinner to deliver 8 words designed to break something in me. Who had stood behind me on my wedding day and chosen cruelty when she could have chosen kindness. I also saw, and this cost me something to admit, a woman who was sitting in my living room without her armor. A woman who had driven here and knocked on our door and said the words "my failing, not yours" when everything in her nature resisted saying them. That was not nothing. "I appreciate you coming," I said finally. My voice was calm. Steady. The voice of someone who had done a great deal of quiet work to arrive at this moment. "And I appreciate what you've said." Linda watched me. "I need you to understand something," I continued. "What you did, those 3 years, they left marks. Not visible ones. But real ones. The kind that don't disappear because someone acknowledges them. They disappear slowly, with time, with consistent different behavior." "I understand," Linda said. "I'm not ready to pretend nothing happened," I said. "I'm not going to smile through things that hurt me and file them away anymore. If something is wrong, I'm going to say so. Directly. And I need to know that when I do, you'll hear it. Yes, Linda said. Simply. And I need you to understand, I said, and my voice was quieter now but no less certain, that I love your son. Completely. I am not your competition. I never was. There is enough room in Daniel's life for both of us, but only if we're honest about the space we each take up. Something shifted in Linda's face. Not a dramatic transformation. Not a movie moment with swelling music and tears. Something quieter and more real, a small interior shift, visible only in the slight softening around her eyes, the way her hands in her lap finally stilled. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, she said. I know, I said. Daniel reached over and took my hand. And the three of us sat together in the late afternoon light, not as enemies, not yet as family, but as three people who had finally stopped pretending and were standing in the same difficult honest space for the first time. It was not fixed. It was not resolved. But it was real. And real, I had learned, was the only place anything good could actually grow. Outside the window the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the city below moving through its evening rhythms entirely unaware of the small, significant thing that had just happened in this living room. I held Daniel's hand and breathed. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the future open up ahead of me, not as a source of dread, not as something to be managed and endured, but as something that actually, genuinely, belonged to me. Healing is not a straight line. I wish someone had told me that earlier. Not as a platitude, not the kind of thing people say on greeting cards and Instagram posts with soft lighting and cursive fonts. I mean it as a practical, unglamorous truth. Healing is messy and nonlinear, and sometimes it looks exactly like going backward. The weeks after Linda's visit were like that. Some days were good. Genuinely good, Daniel and I moving through our life together with a lightness that had been missing for so long I had almost forgotten what it felt like. Cooking dinner together on Tuesday evenings, his playlist on the speaker, both of us talking and laughing and existing in our kitchen without the invisible weight of an unspoken problem pressing down on everything. Those days felt like breathing. Other days the old patterns surfaced like things that had been buried in shallow ground. A text from Linda that was perfectly pleasant on the surface but carried a particular phrasing that made my shoulders tighten. A moment at a family gathering where she angled a conversation in a way that excluded me so naturally, so expertly, that I almost missed it. Almost. The difference now was that I didn't file it away. The first time it happened, about 2 weeks after her visit, we were at a birthday dinner for Daniel's father Robert. A long table, the whole family, the particular warm chaos of people who have known each other their whole lives. I was sitting across from Linda, and she was talking to Daniel about a property investment, something to do with a building his uncle was selling, a business opportunity, details and figures and family history woven together in the way of conversations that assumed shared knowledge I didn't have. It was not unusual. It was the kind of conversation families have. But then she said, casually, in the middle of a sentence, not even pausing, "Of course this is all rather before your time, Emma." The table kept talking. No one else noticed. The old Emma would have nodded. Would have smiled. Would have picked up her wine glass and made herself smaller and filed it away with all the others. I set my wine glass down. Actually, Linda, I said, pleasantly, conversationally, Daniel has told me quite a bit about the family's property history. I'd love to hear more about this particular building. A small silence. Just a beat. Linda looked at me. I held her gaze. Steady, warm, immovable. Something passed across her face, surprise, then assessment, then something that might have been, in its earliest form, respect. Of course, she said. And she told me about the building. It was a small moment. Objectively small. But Daniel's hand found my knee under the table and squeezed once, and I understood that he had seen it, that it mattered, that standing quietly in your own space is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. I started therapy that month. Not because I was falling apart. Because I was finally ready to look at the things I had been carrying and put them down properly rather than just shifting them from one hand to the other. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Pauline Chen, small, precise, with reading glasses. She pushed up her nose when she was thinking, and a quality of attention that made you feel like the most important person in the room without any performance of it. In our first session she asked me to describe my marriage. I talked for 40 minutes. About Daniel, about Linda, about the 3 years of silence, about the phone call, about the morning conversation in pale light when everything finally broke open. I talked about learning to speak up, about the dinner with Robert, about the non-linear nature of healing. When I finished she pushed her glasses up and said, "Tell me about before Daniel. Tell me about the Emma who existed before any of this." I opened my mouth. And realized, with a shock that was physical, a kind of internal stumbling, that I wasn't entirely sure who that was. I had been so focused on surviving Linda, on managing the marriage, on being the perfect daughter-in-law who smiled through everything, that I had lost track of something fundamental. The woman I had been before I started shrinking to fit into spaces that weren't built for me. "I used to paint," I said. Slowly. Like remembering a language. Watercolors. I was good at it. "When did you stop?" I thought about it. "About 2.5 years ago." Dr. Chin nodded. She didn't say anything. She just let the number sit there in the room between us, visible and significant. 2.5 years ago. 6 months into my marriage. 6 months into Linda. I went home that evening and found my old watercolor set in the back of the closet, still in its case, brushes wrapped in their original cloth, the paints slightly dried but salvageable. I set it up on the dining table. Daniel came home to find me there, paint on my fingers, a half-finished piece of the view from our window spread across the table. He stopped in the doorway. His face did something complicated and tender. "I haven't seen you paint in years," he said quietly. "I know," I said. He put his bag down. He came and stood behind me and looked at the painting, the gray winter rooftops, the pale sky, the particular quality of late afternoon light we got in our apartment. He put his hands on my shoulders. "It's beautiful," he said. I picked up the brush again. And something that had been closed for 2.5 years opened. Linda called me directly for the first time in late November. Not Daniel. Me. I stared at her name on my screen for 2 full rings, the old tightening in my chest firing automatically. Then I answered. "Emma." Her voice was different on the phone now, not warm exactly, not yet, but stripped of its former weaponry. Plain. Careful. Trying. "Linda," I said. "I wondered," she said, "if you might want to have lunch. Just the 2 of us." I sat with that for a moment. Just the 2 of us. No Daniel as buffer or witness or bridge. Just Linda and me, face to face, in the unmediated space of a real relationship. Part of me wanted to say no. The part that remembered 8 words delivered 2 hours before my anniversary dinner. The part that still sometimes heard her voice in quiet moments, "You were never good enough," and had to consciously choose not to believe it. But another part of me, the part that Dr. Chen was carefully excavating, the part that had stood up at Robert's birthday dinner and refused to make itself smaller, understood something. Healing on my own terms meant deciding what I wanted. Not reacting to what I feared. Not shrinking from discomfort. Actually deciding, from a place of strength rather than survival, what kind of future I was willing to build. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." We met at a small Italian place near her home, neutral territory, her suggestion, which I noted and appreciated. She was already there when I arrived, sitting straight-backed at a corner table, her hands around a water glass. We ordered. We made careful small talk. We navigated the first 20 minutes with the deliberate politeness of two people who are trying and know the other person knows they are trying. Then Linda set down her fork and looked at me directly. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. "I owe you an explanation of why I became someone who behaved that way." I set my fork down too. She told me about her own mother-in-law, Robert's mother, a woman named Margaret who had made Linda's first decade of marriage a quiet sustained misery. The exclusions, the dismissals, the carefully delivered cruelties. The same silk and razor's voice. The same campaign of small devastations. "I swore I would never be like her," Linda said. Her voice was steady but her eyes were not quite. "And then I became exactly like her. And I didn't even see it happening." The table was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this so you'll excuse it," she said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to understand that it was never actually about you. It was about my fear. My damage. Things I passed on without meaning to." I looked at this woman across the table. At the carefully composed exterior and the genuine pain underneath it. At the Margaret she had been shaped by and the Linda she had become and the woman she was, perhaps, still capable of being. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She nodded once. We finished our lunch. We talked, carefully, imperfectly, with the awkward sincerity of two people learning a new language together. She asked about my painting. I told her about the watercolors, about Dr. Chen, about slowly reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost. She listened. Really listened. The way I had always wanted her to listen, without agenda, without assessment, without the quiet hum of competition underneath everything. When we said goodbye outside the restaurant she hesitated for just a moment. Then she hugged me. Brief. A little stiff. Not the effortless warmth of someone who has always known how to do this. But real. I hugged her back. I walked to my car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. The afternoon was cold and bright, bare trees lining the street, the sky that particular pale blue of late autumn. I thought about Margaret, who had damaged Linda. I thought about Linda, who had damaged me. I thought about the long chain of women passing their wounds forward through generations, each one swearing she would be different and each one, without the right tools, repeating the pattern anyway. I thought about the choice I was making. To stop the chain here. To do the work. To refuse to pass this particular damage forward. I started the engine. I drove home to Daniel and my watercolors and my half-painted winter rooftops. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was driving towards something rather than away from it. Spring arrived the way it always does after a hard winter. Not dramatically. Not all at once. In increments, a warmer afternoon here, a stubborn crocus pushing through frozen ground there, the light returning by degrees until one morning you realize without knowing exactly when it happened that the world has color in it again. I noticed it differently that year. Because I had spent the previous winter learning to pay attention, to small things, to quiet things, to the particular quality of an ordinary Tuesday that contains, if you look carefully enough, everything you need. Dr. Chen had given me that. The watercolors had given me that. The slow, unglamorous work of reclaiming myself had given me a sensitivity to beauty that I think I had always had but had buried under years of survival mode. I painted spring coming in through our bedroom window. I painted the crocus in the small garden below our building. I painted Daniel's coffee cup on the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, steam rising, his book open beside it, the whole scene so ordinary and so completely mine that I cried a little while I painted it and didn't feel embarrassed about that at all. My painting started attracting attention. I had been posting occasional pieces on a small personal account, nothing strategic, no hashtags or growth tactics, just the quiet act of putting my work somewhere it could breathe. A design colleague shared one of my pieces. Then someone else shared it. Then a small gallery owner in the neighborhood sent me a message asking if I had ever considered showing my work. I stared at that message for a long time. The old Emma, the one who had spent years making herself smaller, who had learned to apologize for taking up space, would have found 17 reasons why it wasn't the right time, why her work wasn't ready, why she should wait until she was more certain, more polished, more deserving. I wrote back and said yes. The show was small. 8 pieces, a Thursday evening, white wine, and about 30 people in a narrow gallery 2 streets from our apartment. Daniel was there, standing near the back with that particular expression he had, the one that was pride and tenderness and something beyond both. My mother came up from her small town, wearing her good coat, her eyes bright. And Linda came. I had invited her. It had not been an easy decision. But Dr. Chin had said something in one of our sessions that had stayed with me: healing doesn't mean building walls. It means building doors, with locks that you control. Linda arrived precisely on time, dressed simply, without her usual armor of impeccable presentation. She moved through the gallery quietly, stopping at each piece, looking at them with genuine attention. She stopped longest at one particular painting. It was the bathroom mirror piece, the one I had painted from memory of that moment on my wedding day. Not literally, not Linda standing behind me, not the dress and veil. But the emotional truth of it. A woman at a mirror, her reflection looking back at her, and in the space between the woman and her reflection, something unresolved, something being worked through. I had considered not including it. In the end I included it because it was true, and my work was nothing if it wasn't true. Linda stood in front of it for a long time. When she turned to find me in the room her eyes were different. Something had moved in them, something she didn't try to compose away. "This one," she said simply. "Yes," I said. She nodded once. A small, significant acknowledgement. The kind that contains more than words can hold. "You're very talented," she said. Plainly. Without the faint condescension that used to live at the edges of her compliments, that quality of being surprised that I was capable of something worthwhile. Just, "You're very talented." Offered cleanly, without footnote. "Thank you, Linda," I said. We stood side by side looking at the painting for a moment. 2 women in a small gallery on a Thursday evening, navigating the imperfect, ongoing work of building something new from the rubble of something broken. It was not a fairy tale moment. We did not embrace and dissolve all the history between us. We stood next to each other and looked at a painting and acknowledged, without needing to say it directly, that we were both trying. That was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything. The pregnancy test was positive on a Saturday morning in early April. I had taken it almost as an afterthought, a box I had bought 2 weeks earlier and left under the bathroom sink, not ready to look at it, not ready to want something that much. Daniel was still asleep. The apartment was quiet and gray and morning still. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and looked at the small window on the test for a very long time. 2 lines. I put my hand flat against my stomach. Such an ordinary gesture. Such a completely insufficient response to the size of what I was feeling. There were no words for it, not yet. Just the feeling itself, enormous and quiet at the same time, filling the bathroom, filling me, filling the spaces where fear used to live. I went back to the bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at Daniel sleeping, this man who had chosen me, who had stood beside me, who had held my hand through the hardest conversation of our marriage and come out the other side not diminished but more himself, more ours. I sat on the edge of the bed. He stirred. Opened his eyes. Looked at me with that half-awake unguarded expression that I loved most of all. "Emma?" His voice was soft with sleep. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. "Nothing is wrong." I held out the test. He looked at it. Then at me. Then back at it. He sat up slowly. Emma, he said. Just my name, in a voice I had never heard from him before, a new register, lower and fuller, the voice of someone standing at the edge of something immense. Yes, I said. He reached out and took my face in both hands. His eyes were bright. We're going to be parents, he said. We're going to be parents, I said. We sat on the edge of our bed in the gray April morning and held each other in the specific silence of people who have been given something enormous and are not yet ready to put it into words. Outside the window the city moved through its Saturday rhythms. The crocus in the garden below had fully opened by now, yellow and purple and white, stubborn and alive after the long winter. I thought about the woman I had been 18 months ago. Standing in a bathroom with a curling iron in her hand and a phone at her ear, absorbing 8 words delivered in a silken razor's voice. Filing them away with all the others. Shrinking. I thought about everything that had happened between that woman and this one. The conversation in pale morning light. The therapy sessions and the watercolors and the small gallery on a Thursday evening. The lunch with Linda and the hug outside the restaurant. The slowly, imperfectly, genuinely changing thing between us. The work. All the quiet, unglamorous, necessary work. I had not healed because someone rescued me. I had not healed because Linda transformed overnight into someone different, or because Daniel had said the perfect thing, or because some external circumstance had arranged itself into resolution. I had healed because I had decided to. Because I had looked at the pattern and refused to continue it. Because I had opened my mouth and told the truth after years of silence. Because I had gone to therapy and picked up my paintbrush and stood up at a birthday dinner and said actually, I'd love to hear more when the old version of me would have smiled and shrunk. I had done the work. And now I was sitting in the pale April light with my husband's hands on my face and a new life beginning inside me and the absolute, unshakable knowledge that whatever came next, whatever complications and imperfections and ongoing negotiations with the past lay ahead, I was equipped for it. Not because life had become simple. But because I had become strong enough for life as it actually was. Daniel pressed his forehead against mine. Whatever she becomes, he said softly, she's going to know she is wanted. From the very first moment. She will never have to wonder. My eyes filled. Or he, I said. He laughed. That full, unguarded laugh that had made me fall in love with him. Or he agreed. I leaned into him and looked out the window at the April morning, at the light moving across the rooftops I had painted all winter, at the sky that had finally, fully, committed to being blue. A new season. A new life. Mine. 18 months later, our daughter was born on a Tuesday. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, born at 4:47 in the morning when the city was at its quietest, that specific pre-dawn stillness where the night has given everything it has and the day hasn't quite gathered itself yet. A threshold hour. A between worlds hour. Appropriate, I thought, for a person who was about to change everything. They placed her on my chest and I looked down at this small, complete, furiously alive creature and felt something happen inside me that I don't have adequate language for even now. Not just love, though it was love, enormous and immediate and nothing like anything I had felt before. Something older than love. Something cellular. Something that reached back through every generation of women who had held a child in a threshold hour and understood, wordlessly, that everything before this moment had been preparation. Daniel was beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his face completely undone in the best possible way, the composed, steady man I had married temporarily dissolved into something rawer and more fundamental. He was crying. He didn't try to hide it. "Hello," I whispered to her. She turned her head toward my voice. She knows me already, I thought. She has always known me. We named her Rose. Not for any grand symbolic reason, though afterward people always assumed there was one, given my painting of the crocus and the spring and the whole narrative of new things growing. We named her Rose because when Daniel suggested it at 3 a.m. 6 months into my pregnancy, lying in the dark talking about names in the way you do when sleep feels impossible, it landed with the quiet certainty of something that was always going to be true. Rose. Simple. Alive. Requiring care to bloom but capable of extraordinary beauty. Yes. Linda met her granddaughter on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days after the birth. I had thought carefully about this, had discussed it with Daniel, with Dr. Chen, with myself in the quiet hours of early motherhood when the world shrinks to the size of a feeding schedule and a small warm weight against your chest. I had thought about boundaries and protection and the fierce animal instinct that had arrived with Rose, that looked at the world newly through the lens of what is safe for her. But I had also thought about chains. About Margaret who damaged Linda. About Linda who damaged me. About the choice I had made to stop the chain here, to do the work, to refuse to pass this particular damage forward. Linda had been doing the work too. Imperfectly, non-linearly, sometimes 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But doing it. The Thursday lunches had continued, monthly now, sometimes easier, sometimes still navigating old terrain with the careful attention of people who know where the soft ground is. She had come to 2 more of my gallery shows. She had asked, once, genuinely and without agenda, about my childhood, about who I had been before Daniel, before her. That question had cost her something. I knew that. For Linda, curiosity about someone else's inner life was a new language she was learning late, and learning it awkwardly, and learning it anyway. She arrived on Thursday with flowers, ranunculus, pale pink, the kind that opens slowly into full extravagant bloom. She had remembered. From something I had mentioned months ago, in passing, about the flowers Eleanor had given me, the story I had told her over lunch about the woman who had changed the quality of air in a room simply by making more space. Linda had remembered and brought ranunculus. I let that mean what it meant. She sat in the armchair by the window, and I placed Rose in her arms. Something happened to Linda's face that I had never seen happen before. All of it fell away. Every layer of it, the composure, the control, the careful presentation she had maintained for as long as I had known her. Gone, instantly, completely, replaced by something so unguarded and so pure that it was almost difficult to look at directly. She looked down at Rose the way people look at things that are too beautiful and too real to fully absorb. "Oh," she whispered. "Just that. 1 syllable. Everything in it." Rose, with the magnificent indifference of a 4-day-old, made a small sound and turned her head. Linda looked up at me. Her eyes were full. "She has Daniel's mouth," she said. "I think so too," I said. We smiled at each other across the room. 2 women who had hurt each other and been hurt and done the work and were standing now in something that was not yet easy but was genuine, something that had been built rather than assumed, which meant it had a foundation that assumed things never do. It was not a perfect ending. Life doesn't work that way. Linda would have difficult moments again. I would have moments when the old wounds ached despite everything. There would be navigating and adjusting and the ongoing imperfect labor of 2 people choosing, repeatedly, to build rather than destroy. But Rose would know her grandmother. And her grandmother would know her. And the chain, that long, damaging chain of women passing their wounds forward through generations, had been broken here, in this room, on a Thursday afternoon with pale pink ranunculus in a vase and a 4-day-old girl who had no idea yet what it had cost to make her world safe. She would know someday. I would tell her. Dr. Chen and I had our last session on a bright morning in October, 14 months after Rose was born. Not because everything was resolved, Dr. Chen had taught me that healing doesn't have a finish line. But because I had arrived somewhere. A place of sufficient groundedness, sufficient tools, sufficient trust in my own perception and voice and worth. Tell me about the Emma who exists now, she said, in the same way she had asked me to describe my marriage in our very first session. I thought about it. She paints, I said. She has a second gallery show next month. She has a daughter who is learning to pull herself to standing and seems personally offended by gravity. I smiled. She has a husband who still leaves notes. She has a mother-in-law she is building something real with, slowly and honestly. She has a therapist she is about to graduate from. Dr. Chin smiled. Pushed her glasses up. And who is she? She asked. Beyond all of that. I sat with the question. She is someone who knows her own worth, I said finally. Not perfectly. Not every day. But in the way that matters, the deep down way, the way that doesn't depend on anyone else confirming it. I paused. She stopped waiting for permission to take up space. Dr. Chin nodded slowly. That, she said, is everything. I want to tell you something, wherever you are watching this. If you have spent years absorbing someone's cruelty quietly because you were told that was love, it wasn't love. Love does not require you to make yourself smaller. Love does not deliver 8 words designed to break you 2 hours before your anniversary dinner. Love does not stand behind you on your wedding day and choose cruelty when it could have chosen kindness. You are allowed to name what happened to you. You are allowed to stop filing it away and start speaking it out loud, to the people who need to hear it, in the clear steady voice of someone who knows the difference between what they deserve and what they have been given. You are allowed to stop the chain. It will not be easy. Nothing real ever is. It will be non-linear and unglamorous, and there will be days when the old patterns surface and the old doubts creep in, and you will wonder if you are strong enough for this. You are strong enough. Not because everything will work out perfectly. But because you are still here. Still breathing. Still reading these words and recognizing something in them that belongs to you. That recognition is the beginning of everything. The work is yours to do. But you do not have to do it alone. Find your Dr. Chin. Find your watercolors. Find the thing that was yours before you started shrinking and pick it up again and refuse to put it down. And when someone, anyone, tries to tell you that you were never good enough, look them in the eye, steady and warm and completely immovable. And know, in the deep down way that doesn't depend on their confirmation, that they are wrong. They were always wrong. You were always enough. You were always more than enough. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It helps more people find these stories when they need them most. Have you ever had to set boundaries with a difficult family member? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you want more stories like this, check the description. I have linked some of my favorites there. Until next time, remember. You were always enough.